Hello everyone, and a very warm welcome to another live MEF webinar. My name is James Williams. I'm Director of Programs with the Mobile Ecosystem Forum. If you are brand new to MEF and are wondering what we're about, well, quite simply, we are a neutral platform which our members can use to interact with each other, interface with the mobile ecosystem as a whole to truly affect positive change. We help our members grow their brands, their brand presence. And of course, at the end of the day, it's about growing a healthy ecosystem. And to be healthy, and this is what we're going to be coming to and talking about in this live webinar today, you've got to protect consumers, protect mobile subscribers, because there are a truckload of threats around. Now, those of you very familiar with the world of business messaging will understand there is far more to life than just SMS or voice in business messaging. There are so many channels today, and it can all get very, very confusing. But this is why we have these webinars like the one today to bring some real clarity. And it's always a pleasure having people who talk in straight language without using too many acronyms. So first of all, let's introduce today's speakers. There's a Marco Lafrentz from NetNumber. Marco, a very warm welcome. Hi.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Good to be here.
No problem. And Sarah Delphi from Numerical. Hi, Sarah.
Hey, good morning for me. Good to be here.
Fantastic. So MEF has been around over 20 years. Anti-fraud has very much been at the forefront of MEF activities, as I said, protecting the consumers. And today's topic is something many of you will be very, very familiar with, or put it this way, on the receiving end of. And that's the scourge of Robotext. Now, we've had previous webinars, we've had many conversations within our fraud and revenue assurance working groups, and indeed our wholesale working group, talking about the voice side of things with robocalling. When you think of robocalling, you think very much of the US market and something called stir shaken. It'll be explained to you what stir shaken is during this webinar as well, and what has been happening in the US market. So today's webinar is really very much focused on the US market, but ultimately what we're talking about is relevant to the whole world. So let's start off by introducing our speakers. As Marco introduced himself very quickly and said hi, but could you introduce yourself, your role with NetNumber, and who NetNumber is and what you do?
Absolutely, I would love to. So you can think of NetNumber as a provider that has a suite of data solutions that power messaging and voice networks globally, right? So we have solutions that underpin our customers' day-to-day operations, meaning we provide data that drives their routing, their rating and billing, their authentication, their monitoring, as well as their fraud prevention initiatives. So in general, NetNumber's mission is to solve complex ecosystem challenges and at the same time reduce both cost and operational complexity for our customers. And my role within NetNumber is to bring that to new markets and to drive business development for innovative product ideas and solutions.
Fantastic, very clear. And over to you, Sarah, do the same.
Sure. Hi, folks. Sarah Delphi with Numerical. I am our VP of Trust Solutions, but Numerical as a platform, we are generally a set of products and tools for you to manage your identity either as an enterprise or an enterprise or a service provider that's serving enterprises, to both verify the identities of those communicating entities and register those entities with others to be able to provide trust and transparency to your business's communications. So you have a couple sets of products, but essentially we allow for registration, protection, and monitoring of your phone number, reputation, and also branded calling is something that we offer as well.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much. So let's get the show underway, and I'll go to Marco. So in the US, there's something called the FCC, is it the Federal Communications Commission? Yeah, and they have, well, Sarah as well, you're actually in the US. I probably should be asking you this, but there we go. So actually, I'm going to switch. I'm going to ask Sarah this one, because you are actually in the US. So let's move it to you. Can you just explain to people out there, because we are talking about the US market, we've got an international audience, this is being recorded, it's going to go far and wide. The FCC, what is its primary role? What does it do?
Yeah, so the FCC's role is to provide regulation and oversight for communication service provider and communication services in the United States. So they do everything from radio frequency channels to voice calls to text messaging. And their job is to really run the show and tell us what we can and can't do in communications in terms of the services that we're offering.
So have we seen a little bit more from the FCC in the past couple of years?
We have, especially on, in the past several years, robocalling, as you mentioned before, has been a big focus. There have been given so many consumer concerns and complaints. As a person who lives in the US, I can tell you, yes, I do get a lot of illegal, fraudulent robocalls that come to my cell phone, and they're not going away. They have reduced some in my personal experience, but there's still tons of illegal calls that are going out there and harming consumers. So the FCC and other regulated law enforcement agencies have really pinpoint focused on robocalling. And up until the last couple of years, the FCC sort of declined to consider further regulation or oversight of text messaging in the same fashion. I won't get into the specifics, but because of a slightly different regulatory consideration for text messaging as an information service rather than a telecommunication service. But the FCC has recognized that a lot of scams are happening on text messaging, and we're really seeing, particularly with this latest rulemaking, that they're turning their focus now to texting and seeing that as something that's certainly under their purview to set standards and regulate.
And Marco, they love the word robo because it's robo texting as well. Here we go. So they're just linking back to what Sarah's been saying. Sarah was talking about the webinar's about texting, but at the end of the day, voice came first. The first voice call was in 1876, so it's been around nearly 150 years. So let's put this little issue to bed with robocalling. Are you seeing as well the positive impact of STIR/SHAKEN on robocalling, and to what extent? Or is there plenty more to do on the voice side of things? Has it done what it set out to do?
I think if we zoom out at the first and see that the industry and also the regulatory entities are coming together, participating to create a framework to protect consumers, is something that is in general extremely good. Like the industry agreeing on a technical implementation is certainly a big leap forward into a direction of protecting consumers. But it's not only about protecting the consumers, it's also about restoring the trust in the channels so that brands and enterprises can use these channels. So a motivation certainly is to reverse the trend that consumers are not picking up their phones anymore. So has the SHAKEN really improved the pickup rates of phone calls, the answer rates, the conversion rates of phone calls from brands? I think there is a lot more to do to really improve the trust. Yeah, so I'm sure Sarah will talk more about branded calling, but it is really about making sure that the end user experience is good. So from a perspective of what STIR/SHAKEN was supposed to be doing from a marketing perspective, it was supposed to be blocking fraudulent calls. Or at least it was marketed this way, right? But from a technical implementation, I don't think that is what has really happened. STIR/SHAKEN has given us a framework that allows us to provide additional data around the digital identity of an enterprise alongside with a phone call. So we can take that data and present that phone call as a legitimate phone call to the end user so it can be picked up. But from a technical perspective, where we are today in the ecosystem, and where we are from the regulatory perspective as well, I still think there is much more to do in order to really achieve the benefits of what STIR/SHAKEN can do.
And I'll just add to that if I can. One of my colleagues at Numerical, Pierce Corbin, was one of the primary authors and architects of a lot of the frameworks that are involved in STIR/SHAKEN, and he will tell you that the marketing did not reflect what the engineers intended STIR/SHAKEN to accomplish at the time, and they sort of flew out of their hands and was sort of seen as the end to all robocalling. It really truly is the establishment of a pathway such that service providers over the path of a call can exchange cryptographically, securely, information about what they know about whether the number that's in caller ID has been spoofed or not. Now, what they know about that is, as we're finding out, very little in a lot of cases. And there's also some hurdles we have to get over because we have some non-IP networks where the information that's being transmitted is lost. So a lot of calls aren't reaching their end destination with signatures attached to them. FCC is looking at solutions for non-IP STIR/SHAKEN as well, and separate rulemaking. So there's a lot more to do, but I totally agree with Marco that from a technical perspective, it is enormous to have a agreed upon set of standards that we can use and build upon to exchange information across carriers, including, more rich information in the future.
Well, I think the marketing side of things is really important, because I have to admit, before we talked, before this call, our prep call on Monday, I wasn't aware of that. I really wasn't aware personally that it was designed to be essentially a technical framework, something like that. And the way it has been absolutely positioned all around the world, you're hearing about STIR/SHAKEN, the USA, should it be replicated in the UK or wherever else to prevent voice robocalling, that's voice, James, robocalling and everything like that. And it was very much seen, certainly from the marketing side of things, as the silver bullet, the thing to end it. But it hasn't. And I think it's sad because there's a potentially a risk here when people go, okay, STIR/SHAKEN, what did it actually do? The answer is quite a lot. It set up that framework, but behind all of that has to be the compliance, the verification, the authentication, everything of not only individual, but organizations of all sizes. And of course, we're going to be getting to that later on. So it's done great work from that, but it's the marketing side of things. It just got, as you said, possibly out of control. It span out massively. I think it's, on one hand, it's kind of good because what we're seeing with scams, I run the fraud and security group within MEF, and Net Number is an active part of that, and other MEF members too. And we're seeing so many different types of fraud around, and these are ongoing, these are pervasive. Fraud in many ways is growing. It's this collaboration, but you need this framework and a direction in which to go and to work in, because without that, you're going to have dozens of different companies or organizations spinning off, trying to do the right thing, but not getting anywhere. So Marco, let's talk about the FCC and what they've recently done in the world of robo-texting. So they've put out a report and order, something actually wasn't meant to be a report, what's called a report and order, but it turned into a report and order to help prevent robotexting. Can you just summarize and educate the audience what is contained in there in terms of policy? What does it set out to do?
Sure. I think before I answer that in detail, I would still highlight that is actually a big thing. Like Sarah mentioned it before, like the FCC did not touch any regulations around texting before because of its nature, how it is regarded from a legal perspective. So it was really a big bang. Like they originally filed a notice of proposed rulemaking, which is something that the FCC typically does before they go into making rules. They go out to the industry and ask the industry, like, we want to do this, like, comment on this, like, give us feedback on how to do this. Like, we would like to protect consumers, block robotexting. And what was nice to see is that the industry filed responses in a way that showed that the industry has a consensus and a common view on how to combat unwanted texting. So the FCC has also recognized that and said that whilst we recognize that, we still want to formalize it. So zooming in again on what happened on March the 16th, there the FCC decided to actually follow up on their MPRM with the first report in order, saying like, okay, we have taken your feedback, and from what we hear, like this is the first step that we can do that will not impose too many complications into the ecosystem. They didn't say it will not include like any complications for you, right? So there is still a lot to do for the service providers to actually like accomplish compliance, and there will be more in the future. But they started with a smaller step. So what is this small step? If you take a close look at it, it really reads that mobile service provider are now required, not suggested to or advised to, they are required to block text from reasonable DNO lists. They are required to block invalid numbers, unallocated numbers, and unassigned numbers. Because all of these numbers, it is highly likely that the texts contain payloads that are unwanted by subscribers, because these senders cannot be legitimate senders, right? They're all like invalid. This is one part of it. And the second part of it deals with the greatest risk of blocking, which is false blocking. So also based on their experience in the voice ecosystem and the voice industry, they have acknowledged that when they make blocking a mandatory requirement on the network level, they have to give consumers and brands the option to report to wireless operators that there was a false blocking. So the second part of the report in order included that mobile wireless providers will have to provide a point of contact to resolve such false blockings. But this is not all. Like, this is it for the time being from what we have to like follow, but they already put in an outlook into the future where they said, we will follow this up. So they're going to follow this up with another MPRM on going into other areas on how to like enhance further blocking, enhance potentially also requirements around opt-ins. Yeah, so the FCC is serious about this. Like this is a serious topic for us going forward for the messaging industry.
Yeah.
What?
Big. I was just going to say it's a big step. I think the FCC is recognizing in this first foray, as Marco was saying, that they sort of took in all the comments. Originally, the proposal that they were looking for comments on was, should we adopt stir shaken for text messaging? And the overwhelming answer was no, because there's not a point, right? If you look back to stir shaken being the technical framework for, is the number in caller ID being spoofed? Is the number being displayed as it being spoofed? In messaging, we've changed we have a different framework such that, unlike voice, in which multiple providers can assert essentially any caller ID, regardless of whether they manage that phone number for origination purposes, in messaging, only the provider that has a text enabled that messaging number can send messages from it. So we don't have the same spoofing issue. We still have a very huge fraud issue, but we don't have the same spoofing issue. So the industry sort of said, no, we don't need another technical framework for spoofing, but here's some other things that we could do for fraud. And I think the FCC heard that and they said, great. So what you're telling me is you're already effectively blocking invalid, unallocated, out of use phone numbers. And so if I make a rule that says you have to do that, it won't cause a lot of disruption. So regardless of whether you think I need to, I'm going to set a rule that says that you have to. So this is, we're starting in, it's a big turn, but already, as Marco said, there are further proposed rulemakings that I think are going to be very interesting for the industry to discuss going forward. And they've again opened it back up for, okay, what is the alternative authentication framework that we want to have for messaging then? Because clearly we still have an issue with impersonation, fraud of companies. And wildly different fraud schemes that are not being resolved despite not having a spoofing problem.
So Sarah and Marco as well, what is actually take all the frauds together, and we're talking here primarily, let's talk about the US market, let's focus on the US. What is really at stake here? Because if you look at the SMS, A2P, application to person SMS, B2C, whatever you want to call it, text messaging market within the US, it's very strong, it's very healthy. WhatsApp business messaging, unlike in some countries such as India with 1.4 billion people, WhatsApp business messaging is used massively, absolutely massively there. It's used far less comparatively in the US. And a decent reason for that is the commercial model of SMS in the USA. So it has a reasonable commercial model. Everyone understands it. It's very simple. And as a result of that, you've got so many messaging aggregators. There's so many messaging aggregators in the US I've never heard of, with 100 employees, 300 employees, 500 employees, all over, popping up. If you go to ITW in Washington in May, if you do join us over there, and NetNumber is sponsoring our MEF meetup there on the 15th of May, you'll come across so many companies in the world of messaging I'd never heard of until I saw them last year. So what is at stake? Because for the FCC to actually put a foot into the world of text messaging, something big has to be going on. And is there a feeling that if things don't improve, actually SMS volumes will reduce comparatively hugely because of this fraud impact? What do you think's at stake?
Yeah, I think that's a very good point. And if you take a look at, for example, other trade shows of call centers, of customer care centers, of lead generation events, of enterprise communication events in general, like it is a big topic that outreaches and customer engagements have a decrease in pickup rate, answering rate, and conversion rates. And it is a big problem for the industry because these are desired services. And if you take a look really on what's at stake, I would say SMS is being read, and that's the biggest factor of it, right? They are still a way for enterprises to get into contact with the consumers on a consistent basis with very good answer and conversion rates. So if this is continued to be abused too much, like consumers will lose the trust in those like messages. And it is a real factor. I always joke to say like, okay, like these things are maybe in the US or in other places. And I don't know how you can fall for these traps. But I have a personal experience recently where I got targeted by a phishing attack that, although I consider myself to be educated and extremely like careful, I almost clicked on that link because they knew what my bank is. They knew what my PIN process is, and they knew that. And the only reason why I didn't click on the link is just because I'm out of the industry and I recognize like that's a mobile phone number that cannot be part of a brand identity. Like this is something that is easy in Germany because you recognize a mobile phone number immediately. And like a brand would not use a mobile phone number in general. In Germany, like a bank wouldn't do that because they don't expect a reply from you. But in the US, it's different. Like they have set up very good conversational channels to increase the user experience and to make it very convenient for users to like resolve problems and issues and to engage with brands and banks, like banks specifically. And they trust them. So one of the factors is that SMS could lose its reach, which would be horrible, right? Because consumers would try to like go for like other channels, which we don't want in the telecommunication industry, as we're all dealing with SMS messages. But another factor is that the brands would also get like into issues, and because like they would lose their reputation and they would get complaints. For example, if you receive a phishing attack like me, you would complain to your bank. Like if you're not from the industry, you wouldn't turn to a messaging provider or to the regulatory body or to T-Mobile or Vodafone or whatever. You would go to your bank and complain at your bank. And this is also what's happening today. like the reputation of these brands that have nothing to do with the scam attacks are still collecting like thousands of complaints of their subscribers. And this is where the damage happens on the enterprise side and on their digital identity. And I think this is a big factor for us as an industry to make sure that we help these brands, these industries to protect their digital identities. I think you're muted, James.
Thank you. Sorry. So what about thank you, Sarah? What about the mobile operators, the mobile service providers, from their perspective? What's at stake here for them?
Yeah, I think it's similar to Marco was saying. It's adoption of the channel, right? You want folks to still see, you want your subscribers to still see the value of having a cellular communication service as opposed to going entirely into a voice over IP account and WhatsApp and iMessage and everything. You want people to still see the value in cellular communications and the need to be connected to that cellular network in the same way. And if trust erodes in text messaging as a service, as a communications channel for you to have with businesses, with your friends, et cetera, you could see lesser adoption. And as soon as you have, as you pointed out, there's tons of A2P business text messaging that goes on in the US because it's effective, especially as trust in the phone channel erodes. A lot of businesses have alternated to text messaging for marketing engagements because of that reason. But similarly, if we can't, as we're doing now with voice, find these secure channels that can continue to be trusted by consumers to increase, preserve those adoption rates and those view rates, those businesses will move to other channels that have higher rates of engagement just naturally, and that revenue will no longer be there for those mobile service providers.
No. There is also, I would say, another angle to it, why we have to be very careful about what we're doing, because that is the risk of what we're doing today, right? But when we decide to actually go and fight scams and fraudulent content and fraudulent senders, we run into the issues of making things too complicated and potentially running into the issues of false blocking. So by doing the right thing, we are in danger of putting brands, the actual revenue drivers for our industry, into a position where they don't know what to do. So we have to, as an industry, be very careful about the complexity that we introduce for brands in this entire system.
Mark,
if you're a service,
yeah.
So if you're a service provider,
I'd argue actually, in many cases, many brands, particularly the smaller and medium-sized ones, are actually confused today. Because
I'm confused, and I do this for a living, right? I don't blame them.
So who do you go to for what? And for protection and the anti-fraud side of things is different, because that's not really their concern. They just want to use a clean channel. But there's so many different channels. What should I be using? Because everyone's telling them, no, use SMS. No, don't use SMS. Use RBM. No, don't use RBM. Use WhatsApp Business or Apple Messaging for Business or whatever it might be. So I would actually argue there's some confusion there today, and we'll only get to the bottom of it and really be able to clear it up if we get to the absolute core of it and clean up the industry and clean up the business. Now, we've been talking separately about voice. So StirShaken, you've got robocalling, we've got robo-texting, and you've mentioned that StirShaken, the FCC went out to the market basically, and the US government went out to the market and said, look, what about StirShaken? Can it be used in the world of texting? And as Sarah, you eloquently explained, they're two very, very different things, and Marco as well. You weighed in on this, so they're very, very different things. But are there any common initiatives or the things you are doing in numerical and net number which apply to both voice and texting and can overlap and can proactively today help clean up the markets? Without talking, we do this here, we do that there. Are there some things that can cover both channels today?
Yeah, I think we see it as very simple. Honestly, we are already validating business identity information for customers in the voice space and using that to successfully protect voice channels in case, somebody spoofs their phone number and that tanks their reputation with analytics engines. We help work with them and work with those engines to get that preserved. These kinds of things, that same information, it's the same businesses that are making calls and making text messages. So we see it as the same set of issues and the same set of solutions. While the technical frameworks today and networks may be operating differently, a lot of the service providers are the same, and most importantly, the businesses are the same. And to Marco's point, we need to create a simplistic solution to drive adoption for these businesses so they don't have to, as they do today, register 15 different places under 15 different frameworks. Let's use that same verified information, and we can sort of package that identity information, house it so that businesses can take control of their identity and assert that identity in the exact same manner for both voice and text messaging using the same information. We don't need to check it multiple times. We checked it. We know it's correct.
So Marco said, practically, sorry, go ahead. Yeah.
So I think the key takeaway from the Stir-Shaker framework was that you actually enable the industry to exchange metadata, right? You do not only have the voice call, right? Which is like an initiating a call between phone numbers and an originator, and maybe you have a routing number and so on. So there is very little information in it, which is not enough to do what we want to do. So you have to enrich it. If you take a look at what's happening on the messaging side, like the SMS in its purest form, right, has only 3 elements. Like it has the A number, which is the sender ID. It has the B number, which is the recipient, and the actual payload, which is either a text or a link or a media. For MMS, it can be like more richer, but that's it. You can potentially argue that you have a 4th data point, which is the originating connection or the originating party that is handing you over the message. So, but that's it. Originally, if you take a look at what the industry has already adopted in North America with voluntary registries, like they have already implemented processes where on every interconnection, both service providers take the A and B number and query the industry, of course, also us, amongst others, but us, for enriched header data, right? So you need to have more information on who is the number range holder, who is the service provider for this messaging service. Is this an A2P phone number that is registered for A2P traffic? Is this phone number a registered number for texting at all? Is this a landline number? Is this a mobile number? Like there is so much additional data already that service providers can query and can use that go way beyond the original question of message routing, which was where to go, where to put it, right? So, and this is not just a North American trend. Yes, it becomes very dominant there because the FCC has stepped in and said, like, you guys have to change how you think about messaging. Like messaging originally was where to route it and where can I route it like cheap. Like I have to get it there, and how do I get it there cheap? Like this was how aggregators thought, like, and because you can make money like this. But there is a secondary question, and this is more about responsibility, is like, should I terminate that message at all, right? And mobile operators certainly have tackled that question from a perspective of payload. But we as an industry know the chain of where the text message is coming from. So we can take action based on all of the data that we have just mentioned. And there are products out there that provide you that data on a reliable and trustworthy basis. And it's not just us. I mean, there are other initiatives ongoing as well, like the MEF is a good example of what you have done with your sender ID registry. It is really about providing like registries and central places where you can go that are trusted and say, like, I have this phone number, like, give me intelligence about it. I need data around it to make a decision. Should I route this at all? Should I put it on hold? Do I need further investigations? Similar as how you want to rate this, right? For A2P in the United States, there are different rates depending on how the message is classified and how it's regarded in the industry. So it's already there. right? It's really about committing more to it and using it and being aware that this is something that you have to do as a service provider.
Yeah, it's really about that enrichment of that additional contextual data and allowing that data to be utilized in the same way and managed across both voice and messaging. And right now, because the service providers, not always, but are often separate for voice and messaging, or you have multiple voice providers, multiple messaging providers, unifying that identity for a business, there's CP&I customer privacy reasons why you can't share that around in the same way and update it in the same way. But if you provide that, self-sovereign identity for that enterprise to be able to work with a separate entity like a Numerical or others to manage that identity, centralize that information and push it out to those providers in a way that starts with the enterprise saying, these are my providers, here's who I want to have this information, and here are my phone numbers, validating it, you simplify things and you drive adoption and engagement for those enterprises to feel like they are in command of their identity. They know where their communications are coming from and how they're being presented to subscribers. And that drives engagement and adoption in the channel.
Now, the US market, compared to many around the world, is actually fairly advanced in terms of its structure. It has usshortcodes.com, so that's where you go and get your shortcode. We've now seen the 10DRC, the 10-digit long code. You were talking about the verification program, and there is a verification registry in the US for verifying the identity of enterprises and everything like that. Do you think that the US, with the strong basis that, first of all, SMS is well liked within the US, it's got a good commercial model which people understand and encourage usage of it. You've got an established structure, usshortcodes.com, the 10DRC, and other things in play. Do you think the US has a chance of really leading the way here and showing other countries this is what you need to do?
I think we do.
Or is it already doing it?
Yeah, I think we do. I think one of our biggest challenges is in communication. For me, my background is in both voice and messaging from a risk fraud mitigation standpoint. So it's natural to me to see we need a similar solution or unified solution across both channels in terms of identity for efficiency. But most of the folks that you come across that work in this industry, they do voice or they do messaging, and they may or may not know anything about the other. Very little, despite having worked in telecom their entire lives, they just don't know how it works. And I think that's really, you've seen conferences, people, they specialize in one or they specialize in the other. And I think that's really driving the fact that we haven't found unified solutions and we're talking about this separately. So one of the things, Numerical's historical focus has been on voice, but we are trying to be stewards in the industry of let's have this conversation. Our customers are begging us to say, hey, can you do the exact same thing for messaging that you do for us in voice? And unfortunately today our answer is no. So we're out there saying, okay, everybody, let's come together. Let's talk about it. Let's share knowledge and let's figure out how we can do this today. But I think there's a unique opportunity because, as you said, A2P business messaging is so big in the US, texting is huge, for the US to be a leader in this space and finding a solution.
So Marco, from our perspective, being very central in the US messaging ecosystem, right? Like we're connected to all service providers, mobile operators, all of the analytics companies, firewalls, you want to name it, like interconnection messaging hubs. We really see that service providers are adopting metadata for messaging. It is there, it is already existing, right? So you can, as your service provider, get access to metadata. And there are also like good registries out there where you can provision the information. They're also well known. But I think there is a difference between well known and ubiquity. Like it's not known to every brand, and how to do that. right? And not every process is, because it's telco, is set up for the ultimate scale. And I think this is where our industry can still improve, where like moving to the cloud and making everything automated and easy to reach can help, where implementing cryptographic security measurements can help. And all of this is already happening. And in the United States, I think is really at the forefront of it. One of the things that the FCC mentioned is that like this blocking of invalid phone numbers, they have acknowledged that the majority of service providers are doing it. Like for them, it was not about you're not doing anything. For them was just like, make it even more available, like make it a plain level field for everyone. Like everyone should do this. Yes, maybe 90% are doing it, but there are still 10% not doing it. So you guys also do this, right? So instead of educating like the consumers, which phoners they should not be like reading or deleting, or how they can evaluate a phone number, where they can go to like check it, it's more about educating the entire ecosystem and the service providers. What are the services out there that you can use in order to manage your traffic correctly, to be compliant, and to make sure that these messages do not go through? Well, and same on the other side. Like it's important to take.
Yeah. Sorry, Marco, why you mentioned something there, 90-10. I know it's a rough approximation. So the majority of people are trying to do the right thing, but then you have some people aren't. Is it the case of, is it a lack of knowledge, or their intention, or a mixture of they're intentionally setting out to defraud people, hence they're not on board? That 10% you're referring to, the 90-10 thing.
Yeah, I don't think that these 10% refer to people that are like actively like seeking out fraud. I think when you take a look at the like vectors and the angles of where the fraud is coming from, I don't think there is a big problem in these like CEO impersonation scams or the bank impersonation scams or whatever, where you would actually see established players in the industry like enforcing these like fraudulent contents into the industry. Like you're not seeing that. I think they just find loopholes and weak spots in the setups and networks that they exploit. May they be internally in the mobile operators networks, which is probably out of scope for us to discuss here, but also within the service provider setups. They just find loopholes that they can work around and that they can exploit.
Yeah, I can use an example of for the past 6 months, Numerical has had a repeated issue where a party is sending text messages to our employees impersonating our CEO, Rebecca Johnson, and asking our employees to go purchase gift cards and send pictures of those gift cards so that the scammer can then redeem those gift cards on their side. It's happened repeatedly, probably 6 or 7 times over the last 6 months. And each and every time it's been a new phone number, and they've hit 4 different separate underlying carriers at this point. So each time we have the contacts that we can actually do more than most businesses that are impacted, because we just know the people that are involved. Each time the account is shut down and they've just migrated to using a different service. So that's,
they use email. We've had that in the UK actually within our organization, but via email as well. So yeah,
it's so easy to get a new phone number and just keep rolling through any number of different services. And I will say the underlying carriers, it was both cellular and non-cellular carriers that were being used. I mean, it's just all over the place. So that's fundamentally the issue, is that we're playing whack-a-mole and we shut down one account and they pop up somebody else somewhere else. So it's one of the wonderful things about the ecosystem is that business messaging is so ubiquitous now, and it's so easy to get access to, and that's driven so much adoption and competition and all of the different players that you've seen. So very easy for them to enter the market and start running a A2P SMS service. But we just simply have lost track of who everybody is and who's allowing access to text messaging services at this point from a reseller to reseller to reseller perspective, that, you know, we have to find a way to get our arms around that. And I think that starts from, you know, rather than both from a regulatory perspective and also from an identity perspective. Okay, and before you can get on the channel sender, let's validate your identity and confirm who you are.
So, but in the US, how easy is it to get your hands on a range of numbers? Because ultimately, at the end of the day, you need to look at the source, where the numbers come from. If people are able to rotate very quickly from one number to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, that implies they're getting a range of numbers from someone. Is there anything that service providers, operators, etc., in the US could do better to try and do as much as possible to ensure that these number ranges don't get into the hands of bad actors? Or what's the situation?
It's really tough, right? There are things that service providers could potentially do, but we see a lot of, it's a very competitive industry. So I have sympathy for service providers that would say, if I put up a high barrier to entry for my customers, both legitimate and illegitimate customers will turn away and they will go to somebody else, because the legitimate customers don't want a barrier to entry to be able to do the sign up just as much as the illegitimate customers don't. And so what we see is competitive pressures away from raising standards, because people will just go somewhere else to do this sort of traffic exchange. And so I think, in my personal opinion, many people would disagree with me. I would like to see additional regulation on number acquisition in the United States, particularly, which service providers are able to issue phone numbers. What standards should there be around when you assign a phone number? What checks should you be doing? We have a very open model as compared to someplace like Germany, for example, where you need to go through a separate identification process to show that you're resident. I don't want to swing too far in any certain direction, but I think it's a conversation that we should have in the US about, how we provision phone numbers.
Yeah, one thing that I would like to comment and add on this regard is like in contrast to Germany, like, it's actually pretty good in the United States to figure out who is the service provider of a phone number and who has issued that phone number. So you can today pretty well recognize who is currently in charge of that phone number, who is carrying that traffic. And you can also associate different phone numbers with each other if they have like the same originator or the same context, like the same campaign. So you can do that today. And this is pretty good. Right? But if you do that and you consider that some accounts or phone numbers might be hijacked, which is like the predominant thing, like you're on the network, you have like the problem of SIM cards. Like those are SIMs that are hijacked, like they are misused. They were bought as P2P use cases for personal use, and then they're abused for fraud. Like that's an operator's problem. But for the industry that we're in, for the A2P messaging that's sending messages from outside network into the network, we know who is involved. So we can address those service providers and tell them, hey, there is malicious activity on your phone numbers. And this is probably also one of the next FCC steps, to figure out like who is currently running the traffic, going to them and tell them like, these are fraudulent senders, like do something, like block them, do something about this. But if you do so, you also have to, again, think about false blocking. Like you have to find a mechanism to make sure that we not only know what is the actual like service provider, but who is also the content provider, who is actually in charge of what is being sent. Yeah, and this means that we will have to go a step further. Like today we have a registry, like the Net Number Services Registry. It can tell you who is the service provider and the number range holder and the interconnection hub for a phone number. Like we provide this information. What we do not provide yet is telling you what is the brand that has actually currently the use of that phone number. The TCR is doing that to a certain extent for campaigns, like similar to the shortcode registry. Like you can go there and ask who is currently running these campaigns, like who is in charge of it. If a shortcode gets hijacked, which it doesn't because it's a different ecosystem, but you could alert them and they could also get involved. Now, going back to what Sarah said earlier, like there are many places where enterprises have registered and vetted their phone numbers. And they typically use their phone numbers as part of the digital identity, so they use them for voice and messaging. So that is an additional information where the industry can potentially work together and distribute that. It's a difficult thing to do, and that's something that goes way beyond the scope of our like webinar today, certainly. But this is something that we as an industry can look at together. Yeah.
So providers want to feel empowered. They don't want to feel as though everything, all their power is being taken away and they're just left with confusion, concern, etc., etc. But what tips would you have for providers that allows them to feel empowered, but gives them that nice balance out there? What would you recommend, practically speaking, to providers out there today?
Very, very egoistically, like one thing that I would tell them is protect your numbers by registering them and being notified about things that are going on your phone number. Like that's one thing that I would recommend to service providers. Another thing.
Who do they go to for that? Who do they go to for that?
They can come to us, for example. But
don't be
on
shy.
a different
You can say it. You sponsored it, so yeah.
They can certainly go to the Net Number Services Registry, put an entry in there, and say like, "This is my phone number. Notify me if something's going on with this phone number. This is something that we provide." But on the flip side of it, I would also recommend service providers or like brands to engage with companies like Numerico to say like, get a vetted digital identity, secure this for you, make sure that people know that this is yours, so you can actually be notified and take action about like your reputation associated with it. Like you don't want to rotate your phone numbers because it has been assigned to like a bad use case before, or after you have adopted it was hijacked. Like these are horrible things to happen. Like imagine that you as a bank would have to change your collaterals for customer care, meaning like you have to change the phone numbers where people should call you on in your documents. Like this is like almost impossible. Like this is unheard of. This doesn't go. So come to us, register your phone number, protect it. On the other side, come to ask if a phone number is valid or invalid. Is this something that you should terminate a message to or from? Like this is different. Like whether you should accept the message from or to a phone number, also two different things. And something I would also say is always make sure that you understand that voice and messaging is different. So just because a phone number is on a do not originate list for voice, it doesn't mean that that phone number should not originate SMS. Like there are many call center and customer care use cases where the call center would say, like, this is the phone number where you can reach us. But we will never call you because we don't have a service where we proactively call you. But if you have called us and we have opened a support ticket, we send you messages with notifications on how the ticket is being handled and what are the updates. So you have to be very careful then when you take a look at what data you use in order to make your decision on how you manage your messages. Yeah.
But how can all these, the different facets, the different elements be managed without massive complexity? Because it's okay talking about large enterprises, large concerns who may have big anti-fraud teams. They've got some serious revenue and financial muscle behind them. But there are quite literally around the world hundreds of millions of small and medium-sized enterprises. So Marco, you're saying get your numbers protected. How easy practically is that for me to do? And Sarah, from the voice side of things with you guys at Numerical, practically how easy is it for me to do if I'm an organization on the smaller side of things?
Yeah, you don't need to be a large organization. You can come get your identity verified. It's as simple as providing your business information, uploading or providing a list of the phone numbers that are associated that you're going to be using associated with your business. Those can be registered out and then protected on an ongoing basis. If you want to brand your communications for voice and display your business name, your logo, depending on the channel and the user's network, et cetera, these are things that you can do and sort of feel more in control over the outcomes. The second thing I would say as a business is right now for messaging, a lot of that needs to come through your service provider. So if you are an enterprise that's seeking to communicate or a service provider that maybe is feeling lost, I would always recommend make sure you're getting data on the outcomes of your messages. Make sure you really understand the data that's available to you, both from a messaging deliverability and voice deliverability perspective. What is and isn't available in terms of response codes, outcomes, What does it mean? Make sure you're really ingesting that data, monitoring that data, and proactively taking action if you see a change in your outcomes. Not just, and make sure it has to be a two-way street. Don't just assume, hey, service provider, my deliverability went down. I need you to do something. Is self-examine. Did you change something about your campaigns and your outreach? Did you send something to a new list? Were you working with a different marketing partner and perhaps there was something that happened down the line? Because I will tell you, for both voice and messaging, the biggest driver of change to your deliverability outcomes, absent some other technical issue, is going to be complaints that are happening from consumers. And so definitely make sure you understand those outcomes so you can feel in control of what's happening, and also look internally as well as working with your service provider to try and understand those, in addition to finding more proactive ways to, brand your communications, protect your identity in every method that's available to you.
And what happens if I'm brand new to something? So let's say I could be a startup starting from scratch, or I could be using voice today, other channels, but I'm brand new to using SMS today, starting out. What friction is there in the processes that you guys have in there, or is it easy? It just may take a bit more time because there might be a bit of manual verification having to be done in the process there, if I'm brand new and don't have a track record or history in terms of verification.
So if you're an enterprise, so on the voice side, we have an established process. For messaging, that today needs to be worked through your service provider. So I would recommend for any enterprise that's new to communications to seek out and be willing to pay a premium to work with a service provider that has a high standard of customer service and a high level of transparency and reporting for you on your message outcomes, and somebody that's willing to work with you and get on the phone to talk to you about when something happens related to your messaging services. It's really important. You're going to be beholden on that service provider today anyway.
So this is where service really comes into its own, and it's not just about the commercial model and saving money. Quality. Okay.
Right.
Thank you. Now we have a question from someone who's remaining anonymous, who is taking the mandate to bring the industry together globally for the education and collaboration of such best practices. If there isn't an organization, then where should the role sit, as MNOs are unlikely to come together on this without higher mediation, without higher mediation. So
I think what you will see going forward is an industry ecosystem setup that will probably look the same in every country globally, in every region, right? So you will always have some sort of a central registry that holds the accountability of distributing the information. Like this is something that is like established like in almost every industry where it's working already. Take the example of the MEFS and Ready registry for the banking use cases and spoofing use cases in Portugal, Spain, Ireland, and UK. I think this is out of the question. On the other hand, there will be many service providers that will take care of the vetting process, to verify that that enterprise is who it claims to be, and that is an asset, the phone number that really belongs to that enterprise. Then there is a part that is some sort of an online portal where you as an enterprise, and you mentioned that earlier, can go to easily, can register, can sign up, and establish a digital identity. And then there is a part that takes care of the message flow. So there is some sort of infrastructure provider that is actually implementing the metadata, taking the data that you have registered in your online portal that was vetted through a vetting partner, put into a central registry, so that whenever a message comes, all of the industry players can go and use the infrastructure to question whether that is legit or not, and pass it on to make sure that the passed on information is correct. I think those industry players will always play a vital role. I don't think that there is just one player, right? So, and how this is brought together, I think strongly depends on the region and who is taking the lead there, right? That can be the MEF in the UK. In the United States, it can be net number in America or another setup. Or the CTIA. I don't think it really matters, like who is carrying on the flag here. But I do believe you hear certain companies raising their voice louder than others, and you will recognize them who has taken the lead in these areas and who not.
Fantastic. Okay, believe it or not, can't believe it, we're 2 minutes away from the close. 2 minutes. So from the past 58 minutes, it's clear that we are on a journey of transformation in the industry. There is this current divide between voice and text, SMS. There's that divide at the moment. But at the end of the day, whether an enterprise is using voice or SMS, they want the same outcomes. They want to have that trust. They want to have that trust in the voice channel or the SMS channel. So there's clearly a lot of work that needs to be done by the industry to try wherever possible to bring similar processes into play, which can bring positive outcomes to both voice and SMS. And this is where the number comes into play. So net number, this is the number intelligence comes into play, irrespective of the channel. And so on the voice side of things, what your company is doing to verify organizations and secure the voice channel, it's important, but you need to collaborate. Everyone needs to collaborate with each other. And I would argue in answering that question that MEF is a perfect platform for that, obviously, because we're bringing the parties to the table to talk and collaborate, including regulators. And actually, there is an initiative within MEF, I must mention it before I close, to looking at the whole area of anti-smishing. So MEF members have come together, and about 30 members will be working together on an initiative to really help prevent anti-smishing from a real technical perspective. So plenty of work to be done. So Marco, we could have talked longer, but thank you very much indeed. Thanks to NetNumber for sponsoring this web, and I look forward to catching up with NetNumber at a number of events coming up in the next few weeks. And Sarah, real pleasure speaking to you and having Numerical involved in the conversation. And to all of you out there listening, thank you very much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon at another MEF event and live webinar. So all the best. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.